I hear Tom in the other room leaving a message for his niece on her birthday or something, saying, you've got a friend in me. There's a snake in my boot. You go, oh my God, that's Woody, just like everyone else would.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, let's go, Tom. We got to shoot.
Welcome to the Film Riot podcast. I'm Ryan Conley, and today on the show we have Aaron Schneider, who is the director of the new film Greyhound, which you can watch on Apple TV right now, which we'll put a link in the episode page for this episode for you to check out as well, along with trailers. But Aaron is a really talented director. His first film was Get Low back in 2009. Before that, he made a short film that won him an Academy Award, so he clearly knows what he's talking about, and it's a really wonderful film that is starring and written by Tom Hanks, the absolute legend that is Tom Hanks. And Aaron talks a lot about working with Tom as a producer, a writer, and as his lead actor, and what that relationship was like. He also talks about what it was like to shoot the film. They did build the set, but it was just surrounded by green screen. They weren't out on the water. And he dives into all of that, his methodology behind everything from pre to post-production. So I am very excited to get into all of that. But before I do, I want to thank today's sponsor, which is MusicBed. And MusicBed is a company that I have been partnered with for a very long time, and I use them constantly on short films and, of course, on Film Riot to find my licensed music really simply, because nobody wants to get bogged down in the edit when you're trying to track down a song that works for the thing that you're working on. And we all know how difficult it can be to find music. And MusicBed is just really great at boiling everything down in a way to make it so intuitive and so easy to use and browse to search and hunt down the exact thing that you need for your production, including from amazing indie artists and bands and incredible composers like Ryan Talbert and Chad Lawson. They have over 20,000 songs, and that's growing every single day. Everything from cinematic to indie rock, hip hop, electronic, and with either single song licenses or subscriptions that give you unlimited downloads, there's really something for every type of filmmaker. So you can go create a free account right now and learn more by going to musicbed.com. Plus, as a Film Riot listener, they're giving you 1 month of subscription for free or 20% off a single song license. All you got to do is enter the promo code Film Riot when you check out. Again, you go to filmriot.com/podcast, find the episode page for this episode, and you'll find links to all that there as well. But now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into it with Aaron. One place I would love to start with you, which is where I pretty much start with everyone, is do you remember what the moment was when you realized, like, this is it, I want to be a filmmaker? Like, was it childhood? Was it later on?
It's an unusual story. I was an engineering student at Iowa State, mainly because I'd done good in math in high school. That's how it kind of works in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And my family and I and my sister, my parents were down on vacation in Sanibel Island, Florida, which was an annual trek. And Billy Crystal was down there with his family, just by coincidence. And I had been reading a magazine called, Cinefex.
Oh, yeah.
And I was fascinated with all the, the stop motion and the Star Wars stuff and matte paintings and all that kind of stuff. Because I was a bit of a crafty kid. I like to work with my hands. And so I'd been talking about getting into special effects with my mechanical engineering degree, as if that was a prerequisite. My mom said, why don't you go over and talk to Billy, see how you get into special effects? And so I went over and introduced myself to him. He was very cool. He'd been playing volleyball with the fans. It was back in his SNL days. And he recommended film school. And he said, you'll make your parents happy because you'll get a Bachelor of Arts, but most importantly, you'll get a sense of the industry and all the different jobs, and you'll gravitate to something and you'll find your niche, which is a big part of building a career in this industry, because a lot of directors become editors, writers become editors, people move around, which of course I didn't understand at the time. But very soon thereafter, I applied to a few film schools. And at that point, USC was the best. So I took my gamble on USC, and lo and behold, I was accepted as a transfer student. And then when I got to USC, they had, for the first time and only time, they had a special effects class led by someone from ILM. It was a very unique situation where they just had this class that year that I came in, and I got to see all the legends of visual effects. They brought in, all of the Star Wars people, Dennis Muren, Ken Ralston, everybody.
Wow.
But every one of them ended their lecture with the same fortune cookie, which was, it's all going to be done by computers. And which bummed me out because, it go from a craft to almost a science, right? But I was associating computers with engineering. So I said, oh man, I got to find a way to keep my hands busy. And that's when another class began where they would bring in amazing, legendary cinematographers, Conrad Hall, for, searching for Bobby Fischer and American Beauty, and Owen Roizman, The French Connection, and The Exorcist, and Jordan Cronenweth, who shot Blade Runner. And he came in and he showed his film, Peggy Sue Got Married. And then the next day, the class was to set up one lighting setup from the movie to recreate it. And it was the scene with Peggy Sue in the basement with Nicolas Cage. And it was one light through a basement window. And he and Coppola had staged it so that anytime they needed light on Peggy Sue's face, Nicolas Cage would walk over and the one single light through the window would bounce off his yellow sweater and up into her face. And I thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is amazing. And we got to move the bounce boards around and be his crew. And we're talking about the cinematographer. The ASC recently came out with a list of top 100 accomplishments in cinematography, and Blade Runner sitting there at number 2, right? And this is the point in my career where I'm trying to find my way. And I just committed, hook, line, and sinker to the craft of cinematography. And when I came out of film school, went through the music video route and then into television with the Stephen Bochco show and features. And then I decided I wanted to make my own short film, which led me to my short Two Soldiers, which began the directing career. So to answer your question, it's a much more storied, path than just, getting a Super 8 camera for Christmas when I was 8. It was a long road. It was with some interesting turns. So my passion and my interest built over time as I learned about the film industry.
Yeah. And what was the point that you realized you wanted to transition from the cinematography to directing?
Well, that was, I'd done television, and then I'd done a handful of features, and I was working on a film called Simon Birch with a director. It was a really fun collaboration, and it was a unique experience in that I got to be a big part of, I was less a technician and more kind of a partner in crime with this particular director. And I got a taste of the fun of going that one step past telling stories with images and really starting to think about the whole and how much fun it is to communicate directly with an audience, as the author of the film. And I guess it's like a passion for storytelling that needed a little bit more room to express myself. And I knew that the industry needed me to prove it, right? Nobody gives you anything in this business. So I devised this scheme where I would adapt a short story myself. I would write it so that no one could accuse me of, kind of building my debut on someone else's writing or storytelling skills. And that I would then put my life savings, everything I'd made up to that point, into a bank and spend it all. So that by definition, the film was as accomplished in terms of production value as it could be. And that this would be my plan. That was the container. And then I set out inside of that to find a piece of material to write, to adapt. And that's a funny story too. I'd come home from Saving Private Ryan with having seen it with my dad on a golf vacation. And I went to the library, to the anthology section, to start this process of figuring out, you imagine it to be a long, laborious process. And sure enough, I'm in the anthology section looking what book do I even pull out to start reading? And I looked up and saw the spine of a book, and it said, Greatest World War II Short Stories. And I thought, that'd be cool, for a short film, war story. Let's check that out. And I pulled the book down and thumbed through it. You're looking for a title page, something to land on just to start browsing the book. And I literally landed on the title Two Soldiers by William Faulkner. And I read the opening sentence of the book, and the short story is told from the first person, singular, subjective point of view of a 9-year-old boy whose brother goes off to enlist in the war. And the first sentence read, me and Pete used to go down to Old Man Kilgrew's and listen to his radio. Old Man Kilgrew's wife was deaf, and so he run the radio as loud as it would run. So we could hear it plain as old lady Kilgrew could, I reckon, even standing outside with the window closed. And that night I asked Pete, what's a Pearl Harbor? And Pete said, hush. The scene was these two impoverished sharecroppers in period Tennessee eavesdropping on their neighbor's radio for their entertainment. And the announcer steps in and announces that Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And the older brother is immediately struck with the call to arms, as so many young men were. and goes off to enlist. And the story is essentially the journey of the 9-year-old boy who wakes up one night and decides he's going to run away to Memphis and enlist with his brother and go fight the war with him. Hence the title, Two Soldiers.
Yeah.
And I was in tears by the end of the story. And I said, this can't possibly be. And I just set about adapting it. The first thing that I pulled off the shelf.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Which then, of course, led you to your Oscar. And is that a big thing that ended up getting you your first feature with Get Low?
Yeah. The connection's pretty obvious there, isn't it? Hollywood's about connecting what they see with something else they're doing. To his credit, however, the producer, Dean Zanuck, he certainly saw the period production and connected it to Get Low, which was a period piece as well. But he just kind of knew instinctively that I was ripe for the picking as an independent producer, which felt great because, his dad, Richard Zanuck, discovered a guy, I think his name is Spielberg. Yeah, that's it, Spielberg.
That old guy. I've never heard of him.
I think I have that spelled right. And so we teamed up and we literally co-financed the film. The first $3 million came from my prom date, my high school prom date, who wasn't even in the film business. She was a fundraiser and she helped us find an independent investor.
Oh, wow.
That was our first piece of money. And we built that thing from just, the earth.
Yeah, just a labor of love, sounds like then.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. And you had an incredible cast on that, just legends in your first feature. Robert Duvall, Bill Murray, Sissy Spacek. It's incredible. And then again, in your second feature, another absolute legend. Could you talk about how Greyhound came about as well?
Yeah, Greyhound. Well, first I have to tell you a little bit about how it came about for Tom. He found this book in a bookstore that he bought because he liked the cover art. It was The Good Shepherd by C.S. Forester that Greyhound's based on. And the cover was this illustration. It was a 50s cover. It was an old book illustration of a gray-haired captain standing on the bridge wing of a destroyer with fire and destruction all around him, with his hair swept up in the wind. And for some reason, Tom was just kind of drawn to the art and he bought the book. A little bit like Two Soldiers, right? He stumbled across it.
Yeah.
Same way I came across mine. And he cracked the book open to see what it was inside after he bought it and realized what it was. And then, not unlike me, kind of behind the scenes with this plan in mind, said, hey, I'm going to sit down as a creative exercise and see what this would feel like as a feature. And he got more and more excited about actually doing it. And when he got to that point, he shared it with the powers that be that help him make movies. And it started to make the rounds. And that's where I got a hold of it. And I read it. And it's funny, having told you the Two Soldiers story, obviously I was excited to be reading a Tom Hanks movie. But then when I realized that he wrote it, the first thing I thought was, man, I wonder if this is something a little bit like Two Soldiers for him. If Tom Hanks, the movie star, was going to have the same kind of attachment to material and create the same kind of experience for himself that I did with my short, that'd be something fun to be a part of, right? Because you're not just working with Tom, you're working on something that's kind of singular for him. And so that made it even more exciting. The idea which meant the creative collaboration would be more interesting, a much cooler experience than just, Tom starring in the movie you're putting together.
Sure.
And I sent an email to an effusive email to my agent that made it up the chain as the story goes. And then I think Tom's agent read him my email, which I didn't even know was going to get to Tom in that manner. And Tom said, well, let me sit down with him. So sure enough, a couple days later, I go into Playtone and I'm sitting in the room, in their conference room with, comfy sofas and the band of Brother Emmys, scattered about.
Right.
He walks in with his dog Cleo and sits down and, he's a very warm person. He's exactly what you'd expect to meet for the first time. And first thing we talked about was, because he knew I was a cinematographer first, and we talked about our favorite cameraman. And I asked him, he's worked with a lot of my heroes, Conrad Hall and Gordon Willis. And so even before we talked about the film, I picked his brain on his experiences with these guys. And we just talked about films, filmmakers, and not so much about the story itself. Eventually we did, but because we were just trying to figure out whether there was a partnership here. He was looking for a partner in crime, and I guess I was too. And he said, well, look, why don't you come back in and meet Gary? And it just sort of happened organically. And before you know it, Film Nation came on board and financed the film. It was an independent film.
Yeah.
It was only a $40 million film that we shot in 35 days.
That's incredible.
I think people will mistake it for a classic Hollywood blockbuster, but it was very quickly shot on a, relatively speaking, low budget in 35 days. And Sony, immediately picked it up. So it was almost like we had a studio from the get-go, but it was an independent film whose rights got purchased immediately. So we were in a kind of an independent film environment to make the movie.
Yeah. And how was it like working with Tom? Again, a legendary actor, but he was also, he was your lead, of course, but he was also a writer. And was he a producer on this as well?
Well, yeah, it's his company, Playtone. He and Gary Getzman are partners in that respect. So, on one hand, he was my boss, and then you get to the set and I'm supposed to be in charge.
Yeah.
But we had plenty of time leading up to production to get to know each other and build a creative relationship so that none of those weird complications that you can imagine were really in play at all. He'd put on his writer's cap to have a writer's conversation, and then he'd put his producer cap on to have and then when we got to the set, he'd put his acting cap on and he'd say, all right, boss, what do you need? And he says himself that he likes to come to set with a lot of ideas. And then he's expecting, a collaboration to find the best of them. But he's really easy to work with.
That's amazing.
You come in, you give him a little piece of direction, like, why don't we try this? And he'll say, watch this, right? Which is sort of, indicative of his state of mind. He's just kind of looking to please. He wants to make his director happy. And of course, inside his own ideas, he wants to make the director happy. And then when he's done, you say, cut, he'll say, what was wrong with that? And, it makes it fun.
That is amazing. And, having him as a writer and going back to the script, there was a lot of detail in the film that I really loved and appreciated. The main thing I think, one of the things a lot of people will pick up on is, him wearing the sheepskin coat and being hunted by the German subs that are called the Wolf Pack. I mean, were those details that you found during prep? Was that in the script? And, were there a lot of things like that if you did add as a director, were you adding things like that to the script, or was that level of detail already there?
Well, yes and no. The book tells the story of a British captain because C.S. Forrester was British. So it was the Royal Navy. And we kept the international convoy. We kept the escorts that worked with Greyhound as international ships because this was an international effort. And convoys were typically international teams and crews. But of course, Tom's American. So in the adaptation, we had to translate the more detailed technical accuracies. And they're in there. They're in the book, but they're specific to the Royal Navy's kind of jargon and whatnot. And there's a lot of overlap, but we had to make a concerted effort to Americanize it because we were on an American ship and we wanted to do right by the U.S. Navy in that regard. So, but the sheepskin jacket for absolutely was in the book. And, as you mentioned, probably a metaphor for, in fact, the title of the book is The Good Shepherd.
Yeah.
So the metaphor is even stronger in the book, obviously. But then the job was, okay, if we're going to plug a converter into this thing and siphon it into an American destroyer, that's when I did my research. And we brought on a couple of technical advisors that helped a great deal. But primarily, I knew that as I was making decisions left and right, I needed to be my own expert. So I built a Zenfolio website. So as I gathered YouTube links and wiki links and photographs and Naval Archive pictures, and I subdivided into categories: depth charges, uniforms, K guns, 40 millimeter, 5-inch guns, lookouts, the analog computer. There's a line in there where the radar goes on the fritz. So I downloaded a radar manual that was declassified in the 50s so that I could look at the repair section and find out what would actually go wrong, and make sure the dialogue matched what really does go wrong with a radar system. And just over time, it wasn't my main thrust. It was in the background because my job primarily is to develop the story and make a good movie. But in the background, I was building this website and this body of knowledge that I knew I could just imbue into the film as I went. And having built the website, it allowed me to share everything I'd put together very easily. Just hand it off. Here's the link. Go nuts and dive into whatever category your department is tasked with exploring or visualizing. So that was a way of not wasting it all on me. It was a way of sharing it. So as crew came on, they would become their own mini experts in whatever category they needed. And and if you take this process seriously and it's there in the background while you're making the film, then by the time it gets to the screen, it's been woven into the fabric of every decision you make. And that's how you get accuracy.
Yeah, and you talked about prepping the story and everything. Could you talk a little bit more about that in pre-production? What does your process look like for prepping out that story and really sinking your teeth into the meat of what you want to do? That specific look that you guys end up landing on, which absolutely gorgeous and feels so perfect for this film. What's your process for developing all that before ever stepping on set?
Well, with respect to the visual approach, everything grows out of the script. And, Tom and I worked on the script. It was a bit longer, and Tom always knew that he called it was going to be the perfect 90-minute movie, he said. Perfect 90-minute procedural, in and out, and just overwhelm everybody. So the structure of the screenplay, the narrative the narrative qualities were there. And then my job was to come in as the guy who had to make sure all the ideas would, connect to an audience. My job wasn't so much to change the script or quote unquote develop it in the traditional sense. It was because it was such a unique way of telling a story. You read this script, unlike a romantic comedy where the story lives in the dialogue. You can probably read when, You've Got Mail or Harry Met Sally without even reading the description. You could probably read the dialogue and get the story.
Right.
Whereas Greyhound, it all lives in the description, and you have to visualize what's going on tactically. You have to understand the internal dilemma, the choice between A and B. You have to understand the difficulties and challenges of getting information from the belly of a ship up to a captain where he can make a decision, right? All it says on paper is left rudder to 092, right? That's not where the story lives. It lives underneath it, in between the lines and in what's going on around us. And then Tom had this vision as a writer that this would be a first-person experience, that you would, you beam someone aboard the USS Keeling and they look around and they're like, where the hell am I and what's going on? And you look and you don't understand at first what people are saying and what they're doing or how things work. And here's a guy looking at a sonar, and here's all this dialogue, and why are these men barking back and forth at each other? And you're 1 or 2 steps behind, right, from the get-go, and that's exhilarating and it's engaging. But you have to then be very careful about bringing people up to a level of acquaintance with what's going on so that they can engage real time. So you can't be too far ahead of them. To engage them, you've got to be ahead of them. But if you're too far ahead of them, you'll lose them. And so my help with the script was primarily saying, I know how I'm going to do this. I know how I'm going to explain the radar. I know how I'm going to introduce the radar as a character. He's going to talk about the radar. Then we're going to cut to the screen. And then I'm going to cut to the radar sweeping up in the mast and establish the surface radar dish. And with that sequence of cuts, I think I can acquaint the audience with this concept so that when I revisit it, it's now familiar to them. But I'm doing it with cuts. I'm doing it with structure. By, someone talks about the radar, and then I go in and I point at it and I give you enough detail and give you enough the right glimpse at it, so that you have a basic understanding. So when I return to it, I can farm it again visually for more tension or whatnot. And so my help with the script was making sure that all of these things that needed to be understood and communicated and farmed as the raw material for drama were there, right? We're scripted in such a way that the departments and I had enough to tell those stories. Because Tom's screenplay is dealing primarily with the internal battle, the sort of personal battle and the dilemmas and the command decisions and the insecurities and the fear, which of course were brilliantly written and there on the page. But before that works, right? Before we can care about that glance that or that insecurity behind the eyes, you've got to understand what he's insecure about.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't, all the greatest performance in the world won't mean a thing unless we understand what's behind any particular beat. Right? So it was a very unique kind of storytelling that I found very challenging, and that was one of the things that interested me when I read the script. I think a lot of people probably read the script and said, wow, I'm not sure I understand what this is or what's here. But I was able to look under the dialogue and see what Tom was trying to do. And it was somewhat experimental and very brave, and a bit ballsy, frankly.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do something different, which people don't really do very often anymore.
It's true. Yeah. And it was very intricate. Like you said, those set pieces and moving through everything like you did to keep that all in mind and orchestrate it the way that you did. Did you do boards or animatics in pre-pro?
Well, we did some previs up front, but we didn't have a Star Wars budget. Typically a movie this visual effects heavy will previs out everything. And we did as much as we could with a kind of a four-walled previs crew, a freelance previs crew, as opposed to hiring, one of the great companies. We couldn't afford that. So we stretched our dollar and put some computers in the room and hired some great artists to help us. And the job one was, okay, there's a battle going on outside. In fact, there are many battles. There are collisions. There's this whole tactical universe out there. It's not on the page, right? Like you can't read the script and immediately know how far away this sub is and whether, it's like a football movie, right? Like I suppose football movies it's easy enough to describe the play in a screenplay, right? Because everyone understands a football game, the huddle, the hike, the throw, the catch, that's inherent in the reader's understanding.
Sure.
But a naval engagement, right? And the zigzagging or the pursuit of a U-boat, 5 degrees left, right? All this is foreign to the audience. But before you can even get into how to make an audience understand it and engage with it, you've got to know what's happening. And so I went all the way back to the book and discovered that if Tom had excerpted, as you must in an adaptation, a sequence of a battle, if I return to the book and read the whole battle, and I sit down with a consultant who understands relative and absolute bearings, and we plot out, all of these rudder commands, and we read the glasses and range 15, 032. We soon discovered you can map out the battles based on the novel, and you get an overhead of what actually the writer, he did his homework, C.S. Forrester. And so we took these charts and we extracted these battles from the technical jargon in the novel. And then we went into the Previz room and animated overhead maps of these engagements. Now in real time, sometimes these engagements were 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, but on the screen they'd be 3. So then you get into the whole situation of like, well, okay, movies always accelerate things. So do we want to map this battle to happen in 3 minutes or real time? And we decided to map them out in real time as if they were really occurring, and then figure out cinematic ways of accelerating the battles with the typical cinematic tools you use to do that. And those maps, inspired storyboards, inspired shot lists. And on the set, the actors would huddle up and I'd have the iPad and I'd hit play like 3 times, 4 times, 5 times fast, so that in maybe 1 minute, they could all watch, and it had the keeling at the center so that they could, when they watched it, they could get a sense of what they were watching from their own point of view. So that now when we say action, we have eye lines we can set. We have you start looking here, you end looking here. And we had a crew of guys who'd run out and put LEDs on poles. Then we discovered that 2 people staring at something a mile away, their eye lines are parallel. And if the LED light, if they're both looking at the same LED light 40 feet off the set, their eyes cross. And you realize, oh no, we need one different light for each character so that they're, it's like the convergence of their eyes doesn't give away the fact that they're staring at a marker.
Oh, wow.
So you have 4 crewmen out there looking at 2 different ships, and that's, ends up being, 16 marks to really get the eye lines right. And it gets really complicated. And my goal and my job was to come to the set with a crew and a plan that minimized the amount of, basically crap that they had to deal with in their own heads so that they could muster a performance. Because you think about it, when you watch the movie, everything Tom is reacting to is nothing. There's nothing there. Like, if you feel as though Tom Hanks is engaged with the world around him, keep in mind he's staring at an LED light through the entire film. There's nothing for him. There's no actor. There's no, animatronic dinosaur, nothing.
Yeah.
And so my job was to make sure that I could say, you go from here to here and it's a mile off and it's going to go by you in 2 seconds. And I'm going to cue that over the mic. I'm going to say 1 and 2 and 3. And that's when the depth charge is going to go off. And he would envision that in his mind. He'd put together a kind of a visual, kind of manifestation of that and then he would marry it to the shot and my off-screen cues. And that's how the whole movie was built.
That's incredible. So did you shoot it all on stage then, just surrounded by green screen?
Well, as you know, the film is very USS Keeling centric. It's all from the point of view of Krauss. And, to address your original question, that subjective point of view is what defined the visual language. We couldn't go anywhere that Krauss couldn't go physically, and we couldn't cut anywhere that Krauss didn't call out to for information. So that even if we were leaving him and cutting down into the CIC, the Combat Information Center down in the belly of the ship, we were doing so off his desire for information from that part of the ship. So that even though we were somewhere else, he was taking us there as our character, and everything is his point of view. So, it was a very, very subjective visual approach.
Yeah. And did you find any sort of difficulty, or did you find it liberating to be, in a set like that where, you're obviously not actually on the water. You are, it's shockingly a very visual effects heavy film where it's just, I felt so inside of it. I never felt like their surroundings were a visual effect. You guys did such an incredible job of that. But on set, were you worried about that? Did that ever feel constricting to you at all, or liberating?
No, I didn't worry about it, but I knew it was going to be a challenge because we photographed most of it on a gimbaled set that matched our museum ship. We started with the USS Kidd Museum, which is the only World War II configured destroyer in the world, still in its original configuration. And that became our sort of dry docked museum set. So when we wanted to incorporate guns or, simulate ship-to-ship photography in tighter shots, we'd bounce a crane up and down and make the ship look like it was sailing. And then the production designer, David Crank, matched the bridge on the stage so that all that stuff, as you know by now, the film follows him. It's very much a character study that follows him around that bridge for 48 hours.
Yeah.
And so that was a set where we could control it and where we expanded the bridge by 30% to give us a little more room, and we could fly walls out. And that's where, the largest chunk of the film lives in terms of where we shot. And then we broke the film down into those pieces where he would rush out and you'd want to see a 5-inch gun in the foreground as he stepped out onto the bridge wing to look at the horizon. And then you could drop back and you could put that shot on a week's worth of work down at the museum ship. So you're mixing and matching the ship to the gimbaled set on stage and matching the lighting so that the intercutting is seamless. And in that regard, sell the tight stuff by incorporating the real thing. But yeah, the visual effects were always going to be the gravy on top of the main photography. And the concern, especially on a lower budget film, is, water is a lot like digital human beings. People talk about the uncanny valley. The closer a digital person gets to real, the spookier and more unreal they look.
Right.
Well, the same kind of phenomenon really does exist with water. People don't know it, but human beings inherently understand water and how it moves and all of its unique characteristics because they live with water every day. They go to the beach. They watch the waves crash. So, unlike a spaceship in Star Wars that no one's ever seen before, you're not as beholden to everyone's expectations of what that spaceship should look like to be real. They accept most of it because they've never seen it before. Whereas you got a digital human or a digital water effect, people bring a lifetime's worth of visual understanding and hold you to it. So in that sense, on a relatively small budget, you're worried about trying to pull off one of the more difficult kinds of visual effects work you can do. Water and digital humans are, but we've got animals nailed, right? But water and digital humans are still the biggest challenge in visual effects.
Yeah.
And to that end, I made some rules for myself about how we would shoot this movie in such a way that we could sell its authenticity just with the shot itself. Like, for example, one of the first things I did, a friend of mine and I used photogrammetry, went down and shot 20,000 photos of the kid, and I plugged it into a piece of software, photogrammetry software, and 2 months worth of processing power. And we had this high resolution photogrammetry digital model of the kid.
Wow.
And then I went into 3D software and started exploring it visually during prep. And then I got a hold of NVIDIA that makes this plugin for game developers where you can use NVIDIA's ocean simulation. And they've got a plugin that lets you float an object on open ocean waves based on the Beaufort scale and based on math. And you can input the mass of the ship and it'll float an object in a physically real way. So I was able to stick that model on NVIDIA's ocean simulator and plug in the 2,500 tons and then accelerate it at flank speed, in real world units. And I was able to put another model ship sailing alongside it at the same speed. And I put a little digital camera on that ship and tried to recreate literally the physical chaos and dimensions of ship-to-ship photography. Whereas, I'm in a digital program. I can fly the camera. I can chase Spider-Man through New York if I want to, but
right.
That doesn't work for Greyhound, right? Because if you want people to believe this visual effect is real, even if the effects company does its job, if I haven't created a shot that doesn't fall into the realm of the way you would actually photograph a ship in real water, then I'm betraying their work because I'm not giving them a shot that's real world to begin with.
Yeah.
So I made some rules for myself. The camera can't do anything it couldn't do in real life. That said, some of the more godlike drone shots came along towards the end of the road when people felt that some geography was needed. So we tried to simulate some helicopter footage here and there. But for the most part, the camera's trying to stick religiously to open ocean photography, where you hopefully the audience is imagining some cameraman in a raincoat holding on for dear life, trying to shoot some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that approach really grounded it for me. It just all felt so real and authentic, but much like the performances really grounded it all for me and made it feel very authentic. Like I was right there with them. And of course, again, you're working with easily one of my favorite actors and an absolute legend. So I would love to talk about, what was that like working, with Tom Hanks? And I mean, even in Get Low, again, like I said before, Sissy Spacek, Robert Duvall, Bill Murray, do you find it intimidating working with names like that? Like what is that sort of approach like for you?
Yeah. There's a lot of people out there, I imagine, maybe even filmmakers who, they look down on the whole hooray for Hollywood aspect of our business.
Right.
You can't be too starstruck. How can a director be starstruck and be a cool director at the same time?
Right.
Well, my philosophy is, I love the movies just as much as everyone else. And I love Tom Hanks, the movie star. I'm as excited to meet Tom Hanks, the movie star, as anybody. Same with Bill Murray. I watched SNL. And you can't help it, because these bigger than life people become a big part of your life, from a very early age. And anyone who pretends otherwise is just being pretentious. That said, this is a job. You have to have it in you to get to know them as people because they want to be known as people and they want a very normal and equitable relationship with the people that they're entrusting their work to. And what happens sort of naturally, at least for me, is you get to know them slowly, and like you would anyone. Everyone's nervous around new friends or new acquaintances, because it takes some time to get to know people. But once you get past that and you get to know people and you find a common sense of humor on something, or you share parts of your life and get to know them personally, and suddenly, the movie star melts away. And you're just left with, in the case of Tom, you're just left with this really cool guy, the fun guy to hang out with. And it isn't until you overhear him leaving a message on his niece's answering machine that it hits you. I hear Tom in the other room leaving a message for his niece on her birthday or something, saying, you've got a friend in me, there's a snake in my boot. You go, oh my God, that's Woody, just like everyone else would.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, let's go, Tom. We got to shoot. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you're sort of back and forth between the novelty and the fun of these people's, their accomplishments and how mythic they are in pop culture. And then you turn the other direction and you're just your team trying to build a treehouse together.
And what about just, working as a director with, your cast? How's your process like that? Would say, for instance, you're starting a scene and do you talk it out before your first take? Are you blocking before your first take? Or do you like to see what they do first and then take it from there?
Well, I think I kind of shocked Tom on this one. Day one, I said, you're going to go here, here, and then you're going to walk out here. And he was like, oh, really? And I'm like, yes. And there's a reason for it. Because there's no room in the physicality of where you're looking and where you're standing in this film. There's just none, because it's going to connect to it takes us back to this conversation you and I had about, taking a battle that won't even exist until you get into post and start, doing post viz and filling out what they're looking at.
Yeah.
There's a whole world out there. And to a large degree, I'm one of the only ones. Yeah, I can show you on an iPad what's going on, but it's in my head. I know where you have to be looking and when. And if you don't match up with that, then I go off the rails and I can no longer connect what you're doing to what is happening out there, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you want to look through this porthole window instead of this porthole window, because it feels better or it's better for the shot, and as long as you're looking off the port bow, there's freedom, right? Like I'm not, I tried not to hem anything in too far, because then everyone gets uncomfortable. But I think also everyone understood very quickly, wow, someone's got to know what this connects to. And I'm sure as hell glad he does, because I don't, right? And so I think shortly after the initial shock of that wore off, everyone found comfort in the fact that I knew what we were going to be connecting to, and that I had a vision for it, and that there was a reason things had to happen the way they did. There's a reason you have to get through the door on this line so that I can composite a ship drive-by that marries up with the next order that you're going to say, right? I'm seeing that timing in the screen, and I'm massaging the shot for it. So there isn't any room for you to decide to throw that line out here instead of there, because it's got to connect to something that you don't quite see yet, or that you can't because it's in my head. And Tom was very trusting. He kind of gave himself over, and knowing that it would also free him to concentrate on being, making himself feel real inside of it.
Yeah. And what about, when you inevitably are going to give those adjustments to the performance, what do you find your process there is like? What's the dialogue usually with your actor?
Well, to some degree, you're discovering, the big challenge of any given scene on a day's shoot of Greyhound, right, is you're blocking the scene, you're trying to communicate a tactical awareness to the actors so that they can be a part of it. You're telling them where to look, and you're getting the physicality, of the scene on its feet, so that in your mind, when you cut to all those visual effects shots and things going on out the porthole, you can see it in your head. Okay. So you get the physical structure of the scene on its feet. And then once it's on its feet and you're comfortable that you've got the bare necessities, you've got the structure that you need to convey the scene, then you start looking at the spaces in between. It's like, okay, now where can Tom and I embellish this with a detail or a beat? Where is the hesitation in the scene? Where is the if there is an emotional churning or going on in Krause, where is that happening? And where can we focus in on it? And how can we shoot that? So if this is a film about a captain's performance in between the craziness of battle, then what are the in-betweens? Where do they live? And how are they unique? How are they different from the other one? And who's watching it happen? Who catches it out of the corner of their eye? Who does he have to hide it from? What does he do with his hands to busy himself so that he doesn't give himself away? You get the basic idea of the scene on its feet, so that you got like, okay, thank God, there's the story. There's what's got to happen. Now, how do we fill it up? And of course, Tom brings a bunch of that to the table himself. And on every take, he'll sew more and more of that into it. But then every now and then you're at the monitor, you go, you know what? It needs something. This sequence needs something to hang its hat on. It's feeling a little flat across the board, like we're just doing it instead of it contributing and you talk about it, and you figure it out. And it's a really different way of working, because in a typical screenplay, the screenplay has been very architected with a very specific narrative goal written into the scene, right? This is the scene where she's going to accuse him of infidelity. So the first half of the scene is like cagey, and then it finally comes out. The dynamic of the scene turns, and we have this confrontation between lovers, right? That's a very tangible structure to build a scene on that actors and directors can work with. But when it's Greyhound and the raw materials of the scene are the experience itself, the horror, the fear, the insecurity, that's not built into the scene organically. You have to, if you're making an experiential film, then you're directing the experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, what about moments, not just on Greyhound, with any of your films as a director, even the short film, have there ever been moments where maybe you and your talent disagree on something performance wise? Maybe they see it a different way that you do. And if so, how do you resolve that?
The easiest way to do it that isn't tricking anybody or being dishonest is to say, hey, I'd like to try something different. Are you with me? Right? I want to experiment with something. Are you game? And 9 times out of 10, an actor will go, yeah, what'd you have in mind? Because frankly, sometimes you don't know, you'll get into post-production and you had the feeling that it needed to go in another direction and the actor had it right to start with, and you go, oops, thank God the actor did what they did on take 1, 2, and 3, because now that I see the context and what they were really doing, I like it better than what I thought it needed to be.
Yeah.
Robert Duvall was very good about that. You gave Bobby take 1, 2, and 3. They belong to him. There's no discussion, no nothing. You don't direct Bobby Duvall in takes 1, 2, and 3 because he's brought his performance to the table. Pretty much everything he brings is fantastic. But then the only sort of backstop you're responsible for is making sure it's going to fit in the big picture, which an actor isn't always looking at. Sometimes they might not be thinking about where they came from. They might be thinking about where they are now without the sort of sense, because of the crazy nature of the set. But after take 3, if I went up to Bobby and said, let's just try something, he'd go, okay, what do you want to do? And, you were in the hot seat. You had to give him a good idea that he felt was worth playing with. But, he was game if you could make a case for it. Tom's very different. Tom himself will tell you, I like to come with 100 ideas and have someone help me shape it. Right. So I was much more engaged with Tom as a partner, which made it much more fun as a director.
Yeah. My last question, just keeping in with the performance, is there, a certain method that you like to use, or does it constantly shift with every performer in what you can bring to them, what you can say to them, like, the types of things you say to get them to the directions that you're trying to take them emotionally?
Yeah, it does change because everybody's process is different. Like I described, Robert Duvall liked to be left alone so that he likes to bring 100 different ideas to the set and then experiment and find it and work and collaborate more back and forth. And you try to adapt. It's your job to figure out what their process is and support it as best you can.
What's next for you now? Do you have another film set up that you're in development on, or?
Yeah, we took a film. The writer of Get Low sent me a script a while back, a really, really beautiful drama that involves, I would call it a human drama that features a dog as a character who becomes a Greek chorus and a narrator. It's like a human drama from the point of view of a dog, as voiced by Bill Murray. Not a talking dog movie like Babe, but a drama, exploration of the human condition through the eyes of a dog.
Interesting.
And Anne Hathaway fell in love with it as I did, and we called on Robert Duvall and Bill Murray, our old Get Low friends. And it's a smaller movie. I wouldn't call it an indie, but and CAA took it to the virtual Cannes market. We've been talking to some people about financing. So that's kind of an ongoing effort. But as you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. They keep moving the goalposts on us in terms of when we can kick off again.
Sure. Every
time they move the goalposts, say what's next when you don't even know what's next in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But I can't wait to see what you do next. I really thought this was an incredibly beautiful film that was amazingly orchestrated, especially, given the fact that, like you said, it was a $40 million movie that easily looked double that to me. So, it's amazing film. Congrats on the film. And again, I can't wait to see what you do next. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you. Thanks for helping us get the word out. I hope everyone enjoys the film.
Absolutely. I bet they will.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that's it for today. Again, a huge thank you to Aaron for taking the time to talk to us. Of course, jump over to filmriot.com/podcast and find the episode page for this episode. You'll find more links for Aaron there. And again, if you haven't seen Greyhound, there are some frames in there that entirely look just ripped out of a painting. It's really beautiful. So definitely check that out. Of course, you can find me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Conley. And if you hadn't noticed, the podcast is consistent again. We are every other week and will be so for the rest of the year. We have more interviews coming, a ton already recorded for you guys. Really great stuff from really great filmmakers. So make sure you keep checking it out and share with your friends. Also, if you didn't know, we have our blog kicked off, the Film Riot blog, which we're going to continue to grow. We have great writers on there. We have Ron Dawson as our managing editor, and he's doing an incredible job. Our first official blog post was Color Grading 101, talking all about human vision basics, starting from the fundamentals, how your eye actually sees light and color, which is extremely important foundation to have. Our second was about frame rates and shutter speeds. So definitely go and check that out. We're going to be posting 2 to 3 times a week to start out, and we're going to continue to grow it from there. And again, we have some amazing writers lined up. I'm really excited about all the stuff that's happening with Film Riot. It's just going to continue to grow and get bigger and better. So again, make sure you share all the things. It's really helpful. But until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.